our course called Equity and Activism in Education. So that's my connection to New College. It was an excellent course that looked at how we think about education and how it links to justice, how it links to building up the individual, all the ways that our education system, particularly in Canada, has failed to do that, and how we address that failure. So that's that course. How I came to graduate studies is a bit of a complicated story because I am first and foremost a theater artist. So I'm a director and a playwright and a dramaturg. A dramaturg is a word that means theater consultant. I work with theater companies and theater artists in developing new works. I particularly work in feminist collectives that are developing new work in studio. So rather than having a playwright go off, write a play and then come with something that is finished, I work with playwrights and actors in the space to develop performances communally. That's my primary thing, but I do all sorts of things. But I also, and my students will know this, deeply love philosophy and ethics. And so I turned to graduate studies as a chance to spend time with big questions that don't have answers, and to spend time reading and connecting with other people to help me think better and think broader, especially about inclusion and justice. Beyond my own sphere of fairly traditional theater training that was conservatory based, so dance class and vocal class and, putting on your yoga sweats every day and doing your Pilates, and moving from that space into a space that thought about art less traditionally, less through the Western canon and heading towards commercial theater and Broadway, and more to alternative forms of art that push the boundaries of artistic practice and community practice. Does that answer your question, Tara?
Yes, that's wonderful. It's a very interesting journey. You're the first artist that we've interviewed on New Research at Noon who has talked about a journey from being an artist to being a graduate student. And of course, you found your way to an arts-based testimonial
I did.
project. So that's wonderful. For those of you just joining us, welcome to New Research at Noon. Today's focus is on research with LGBTQ families, and it's an arts-based testimonial project. We have three New College TAs who worked on the project, and we are just doing some introductions, hearing a little bit about how our guest speakers came to graduate school, and hearing a little bit about their journeys. Benjamin, do you mind going next, telling us a little bit about what course you TA at New College, and tell us a little bit about how you came to grad school?
Sure. So I'm glad Jenny did the overview of equity activism in education, because that's also the course that I've TA'd in before. I TA'd that for Tara from 2015 to 2018, and possibly again in the future if it runs again. And also Tara and I and various other people have co-taught a course at OISE called Gender, Sexuality, and Schooling. So kind of folded into each other at different times. So I came to OISE a few different times over the past many years. I did my research-based MA in curriculum teaching and learning, or curriculum and pedagogy, starting in 2015, and then moved right into my doctorate that I'm working on now. I'm in my 4th year of my doctorate now. I had also been at OISE 2006, 2007 when I did my Bachelor of Education. Prior to that, I had done my undergrad in visual art and worked as an artist for 5 years, and then I worked as a teacher for 8 years and came to grad school. So that my teaching classroom experience specifically is more of the, I guess, direct-ish route that got me to grad school. So specifically, my own research is a lot concentrated in questions related to teacher professional learning. And that interest came from being a teacher working with colleagues in the school system, where the actions and inactions at times of my colleagues are something that I found very difficult to understand, especially from an equity perspective. So specifically, I identify as trans and non-binary, genderqueer, and the bulk of my physical and social transition was happening while I was teaching K-6 in the TDSB, and also before a lot of the current laws that we have in the country around human rights related to those things. And so I had a lot of experiences, both good, bad, and in between, with humans in relationships about how teachers navigate things that they don't feel comfortable in, that they don't understand, and that are considered socially controversial. And what I came to before grad school was the question of like, what happens for educators in the space between believing in something, whether it's like ethically or just in your heart, and then actually translating that into doing work in classrooms for kids and families, specifically in my research around trans and queerness, but just anything that people find hard to talk about. And in my PhD, I'm looking at the question of what formats for teacher professional learning show promise in supporting educators to expect, welcome, and include trans and gender diverse kids and families and staff in schools. And my answer, such as it is, or a suggested answer, involves working with visual storytelling and pairing that with supports for teachers to do their own identity work and to build collegial community around that in a way that's sustainable, that doesn't involve queer and trans and racialized people standing up in front of our colleagues and using our bodies to teach them.
Wonderful, thank you. So I did put the name of the course that Jenny, Benjamin, and I teach together. It's New 345. It's a 3rd and 4th year critical studies in equity and solidarity program course, equity, activism, and education. And I'm hoping to offer it in January 2022 if there are students who will be at U of T then and want to take it. After we're going to go listen to Bishop Owis now talk about their journey to grad school and the course that they are TAing. And after that first round of questions and answers, we'll ask our participants if anybody has 1 or 2 questions for Benjamin, for Jenny, for Bishop, before we move on to hear a little bit about their work on this arts-based testimonial research project called LGBTQ Families Speak Out. But Bishop, tell us a little bit about your TA work. You're TAing right now, and how you came to graduate school.
Yeah, so I'm a teaching assistant at New College. I'm TAing a course called Community Engaged Learning with Sam Teckel, and he's lovely. And the course is really about, nonprofits, the social sector, working in nonprofits and NGOs, but really focused on like community learning and engaging and how you can make a difference. There's often a practicum component where you get an opportunity to work in like a nonprofit. So something like Planned Parenthood, or working with like, CanFAR, or, one of these many organizations that exist in Toronto and in the DGA. But that's obviously been kind of taken away because of COVID. But, if you decide to take the course in the future, it will likely be available. And it's great, like practical experience where you can apply your knowledge in person. So like Tara said, I'm a PhD candidate over at Boise. And so my research focuses on queering the sex education curriculum with queer and trans youth of color. So looking at the intersections of gender, sexuality, and race. And, it's really rewarding work, and it's work that I've done before in community settings. So I've worked a lot with Planned Parenthood and the Sex Education Center at U of T as volunteers, and trying to bridge that, like, the gap between like formal education and community education, which is why the course at New College is so perfect for me, and I love it. So my journey to PhD is both very untraditional, but also kind of traditional at the same time. So for background, I grew up in foster care and in group homes, and so it was a miracle that I graduated high school. People really didn't expect me to do that. So I struggled through my undergrad quite significantly, and then didn't know what graduate school was until I applied for Teachers College, which at U of T is now 2 years. I think across the board in Ontario it's 2 years, but at U of T they changed it from a Bachelor's of Education to a Master's of Teaching. And so with that, you both get a master's and your teaching qualifications. And so luckily, as fate would have it, I got into that program and was really excited to become a teacher because that's really all I've ever wanted to do. Got in there, realized that teaching was everything I ever wanted, and it was lovely, but it was also incredibly difficult. And I had a hard time, managing a lot of my emotions, and like, I found it incredibly draining. And so I admire teachers to the 10th degree. They are incredible people, but it was probably not for me long term. I felt like I was going to burn out, and so through that program, the MT program at U of T, you have to write like a mini master's thesis. And I got involved in research, and I reached out to Tara, and I joined Tara's research team, and I realized how much I loved research, and decided to pursue a PhD program. And so I applied to the University of Auckland all the way in New Zealand, and I also applied to U of T. And I was like, why would I leave home when I have such a great community here? And so I stayed at U of T, and that's kind of how I got into a doctoral program and how I got to my PhD. But it was, again, like I really had no idea what graduate school was at all. I had, it was like incredible that I even got to an undergraduate degree as like a first gen person of color. Like it was quite, a struggle. And so it's, I don't know if that's the case for anyone else in the room, but it was definitely a challenge. And so whatever advice we can offer here I hope is very helpful to you guys.
Thank you so much, Bishop. So now we're going to just take a few moments and see if anybody has any questions. And what you could do is unmute your mic and just say, I have a question, and go ahead. Or if you prefer, you can put the question in the chat, something that you want to know a little more about, something that is interesting to you about the journeys each of our guest speakers have talked about. We have time for 1 or 2 or 3. So just unmute your mic, say, I have a question, and tell us. Or you could put your question in the chat. And I see that Annetta is here, and Jared is here, and Sheila is here. These are my wonderful colleagues from New College. Thanks for being here. Ramabai is here. Thanks for being here. And do we have any questions about journeys? Sheila.
Hi there. Hi. I just wanted to say that I'm just so excited to be here because I was involved with arts-based research at OISE. And also, Benjamin, I don't know if you recall the Festival of Literacies, but you did a most incredible session with a group of literacy practitioners or teachers and made this beautiful object. And all the people who came, it was quite a big group, this is like a found book. So I was just so excited you're coming, and I know you're speaking about many other things, but I'm really curious about your art practice, because inside each person made something related to reading or writing or literacy, and it's just I always keep this nearby, and we kept using it with literacy practitioners after your workshop. So thank you.
Thank you so much for showing me that. That was 18 years ago, I think, actually.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
It's just a beautiful.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. That was actually.
So anything more you can say about that later, or your
that was my first
practice.
introduction to OISE, actually, because it was before it was right after my undergrad and before I even was thinking about Teachers College. So that's very cool. Thank you. I guess, did you want me to say something now about that, Tara?
Sure, please do. And then Sheila, after Benjamin talks a little bit about their practice in relationship to that project, maybe you could tell us how you use it with your students now. That would be great.
That would be lovely. Thank you. I guess probably something that will tie into both my research work and the work that I have been doing with Tara and the team. So as I was saying, I did my undergrad in visual arts many moons ago. And I also, when I was practicing just as an artist, I had done a lot of work with kids before, and I really miss being with kids. So that's why I decided to go to Teachers College. And I loved and still love classroom teaching. And the thing that I found throughout that 8 years that I was in the classroom was that I was a better teacher when I was doing art, and I was a better artist when I was teaching, and I think that's still true. And Tara knows now, as I'm working on these graphic stories that are part of my dissertation, that I'm often talking about how learning how my brain works, kind of, and how I have learned to pay attention to the way that I can communicate at a certain time. So right now I'm in a big drawing groove, but I know that's gonna wane at some point, and I'm not gonna be able to, those images aren't gonna come as easily. And so that's when I need to sort of jump on the either reading or writing train. So I guess I throughout my research and my professional life in various different ways, the most useful thing that I've learned about my arts practice is that it always needs to be there, and also it needs to breathe organically in that way, so that I've learned to not worry when it shifts into something else, and that creativity can come into the way that I write, or the way that I present, or even the way that I take in information. It's helpful.
Thanks. And Sheila, briefly, can you
so
tell
great.
us a little bit how you're using the work that was produced in that workshop?
Well, I used it throughout my time working with adult literacy practitioners. We had what we called I think it was an arts activist collective, sort of in around the time, I think it might have been shortly after. But, to be honest, it's sort of like a little reminder of an exciting teaching moment, and, kind of a reminder of you and the work you did. But just, knowing you were speaking, and I'm glad some of my colleagues are here, because I really believe using objects, even in this time when we are, virtual, in our teaching, is just really helpful. So I might talk to Davida, my fellow writing faculty, or some others about, just these creative things, how to work with them while we're doing this new way of working.
Thank
It's
you
so
so
nice
much.
to hear, because I'm making objects for my thesis as books to be read. So that's good to hear. Thank you.
Fantastic.
I'm going to ask Jenny and Bishop one question about their journey, and then we're going to go on to the next set of questions. New folks, welcome to New College, New Research at Noon at New College. We're so happy you're here. Bishop, you talked about the position of being first generation student. And I know there are lots of folks at New College who are, and lots of faculty and staff who work with students who are first generation. What do you think are some of the supports that might make a difference to students who are the first in their families to come to university? Thinking back on your own journey, is there anything that you think stands out as something that really made a difference?
Yeah, I mean, and it's always the same answer. It's my teachers or professors. I didn't have family growing up. I didn't have family throughout my undergrad and graduate degrees. And if they are there, then they're usually not the best supports, and they often require more energy than they're worth. And so, which is sad, but it's, teachers and professors have become kind of like family to me. Tara, I've never told you this, but I call you like my academic mom, and that's how I explain it to people. I'm like, Tara's kind of like a mom to us. She kind of just takes care of us. And that's kind of how I see a lot of the colleagues and a lot of the profs that I work with as mentors, but also as like pseudo family members for me. So, and it was hard because in my undergrad, I was like, I don't think I belong here. I can't take up space. Like who am I to go and talk to a professor? Like they don't care about me. And it was really difficult. And it was only in my later years of my undergrad where I'd like actually show up at office hours and be like, hey, can we talk about this one small thing? And then also just like shoot the shit and just like, actually, can we talk as people? And it was through that I got comfortable talking to professors, and they were like, okay, well, I can write you a reference, and like, this is how I can support you. And it was the same in my master's. And but it also, like, I will say that it's really difficult to find that you have agency to like send an email and be like, hey, I'm interested in working with you, because again, as like first gen, as a person of color, queer, trans person, like you don't feel like you deserve to take up space. And so it's both a personal journey that I've had to go on, but also one of realizing that you do belong regardless of what people say. And that if you find a really good prof or teacher or mentor or whatever, like you need to hang on to them, and they will definitely support you throughout everything that you do. And that is such a gift to be able to get.
Thank you. Just before I go on to Jenny and ask Jenny a question about her journey, I will say to the undergrad students here, it was a cold call that Bishop made. It was an email that came out of the blue, and that I didn't solicit it, that I was looking for more people on the research team. We actually had a very strong research team, but Bishop had heard about the work and presented themselves, said what it is that they had to offer, what they thought they could do on the team. And it was such a compelling note. And even though I wasn't looking to expand the team, the family, I just knew that you would be such a good person for us to work with. And you were very brave. The team had been together for a couple of years, and you came, and I'll never forget that first meeting. I said, well, we're in the middle of reading our interview transcripts. You know, have a seat and come play. And you participated right from the very beginning, showing incredible courage. And you know, by the time we had finished, within an hour, you were part of the team. So I think the risks that Bishop took are risks that, you know, I would encourage others to take. And I'm going to go to Jenny. And there's a question though for Bishop. What did you major in your undergrad? And then there's some comments about thanking you for sharing, Bishop. What did you major in undergrad?
Yeah, well, I was talking to someone yesterday. I actually was going to study theater, which is so funny. And I think Jenny was like surprised when I first told her that. I was going to go to Windsor to do the BFA, which I got into. And then I decided to go to Guelph, and then I took a year off and realized that like I just wanted to teach. Like I didn't even care what I taught. And so I did my undergrad at Ryerson, which was great because it was a smaller university, but still in Toronto. And they have a program called the Arts and Contemporary Studies program, but it's really just interdisciplinary studies. So you learn about, you know, history and economics and education and law. And it's very interdisciplinary, and it's wonderful because it means that a lot of the knowledge that I have now as a teacher, but also graduate student, I'm like, oh yeah, I learned that in my undergrad. Because you were exposed to so much. So Ryerson's a great school if you're thinking about it. Their graduate stuff they don't have as many graduate programs, but it's wonderful. I mean, U of T is wonderful as well, but you know, options.
And in terms of interdisciplinarity, you know, having an undergrad that gives you an interdisciplinary focus really does stand you in good stead for all kinds of things later on. And all of our programs at New College are interdisciplinary. We have Caribbean studies, we have African studies, critical studies in equity and solidarity, community engaged learning. So these are the courses and the programs that give you that interdisciplinary base. Jenny, just before we go on to our second set of questions, like I said earlier, you being an artist who goes to a PhD is a very unique journey. What would you say to young artists about that choice? What do you think going to graduate school has done for your artistry?
Oh, it's a great question. So the first thing I would say is that so my master's degree was a hybrid program that was very arts focused, but I hadn't read an article, like a published academic article, until I did my master's degree. I didn't read a single one in my undergrad, because my undergrad, while it was academically rigorous, it was at U of T Mississauga, and I was certainly writing research essays. The focus really was singing and dancing and putting on Shakespeare. And my master's degree, followed that tradition. But I did my master's degree in England at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art and London University. And my focus there was contemporary directing. And my master's thesis, was putting on a play. So when I came to do a PhD, I had incredible imposter syndrome. I showed up being like, I do not belong here because I am not an academic and I am not a researcher. What I know how to do is put on plays. And I talk a good game because I've always loved philosophy and I've always loved theory and those big ideas. But when it comes to I'd never heard of an ethics, I didn't know what that was, that we had an ethics body at U of T, and that in order to do a research project, you had to put in an ethics report and have an ethics, I'm even blanking on the word now, but you have to have your ethics protocol in place to do your research. I didn't know any of that. And so my first year in the PhD was really an orientation of thinking, of figuring out what graduate school is, what is the relationship between art practice and research, and teaching, because a parallel career for me had always been teaching theater and teaching in other forms as well. And so the space between what teaching is and what teaching at university is, because I loved my time at U of T as an undergrad. So I loved my academic courses, but figuring out, okay, so a professor teaches courses, but also does research and writes books about that research. And it's about theater, but it isn't making plays. So just like figuring out the landscape was a huge journey for me. And so it was a difficult thing to do, but I will say this is that theater training teaches you how to work with people, and graduate school is collaborative. It can be very, very lonely. You're working on your own project, writing your own thesis, but your classes are deeply discussion-based. If you are happy to be lucky enough to join a research team like this research team, that is deeply collaborative, and our theater training gives you those skills of how to work on a team and how to work towards a project. So that put me in good stead.
Great. Now we're going to move on to each of our guest speakers' work on the LGBTQ Families Speak Out project, which, if you're just joining us, is an arts-based testimonial project. And I think we're going to start with you, Jenny, again, if you don't mind. One of the arts-based ways that we shared our findings from interviews with 37 families about their experiences at school was through a verbatim theater play. So could you talk a little bit about how the team moved from interview data to creating a verbatim theater play? And then we'll move to Benjamin, who will talk about how the team was able to layer the analysis that came through the verbatim theater play through visual art. And then we'll move to Bishop, who will talk about the ethics involved in an arts-based testimonial project. So, and then we'll stop for some questions again. So Jenny, go ahead.
Okay. So this is a research team. This is a research team set at a graduate center. Tara is our head researcher as a full professor at the time at OISE. Now you're at New College. And you got, I'm saying this for just the history of the project. Our team earned a SHRC grant that set us up to be able to do a multi-year research program that had several pieces to it. But one of the pieces right from the very beginning was to take our research and turn it into a play. because plays are able to do things that other more traditional forms of academia aren't able to do. So plays reach a different audience and engage in a different sort of dialogue, a different sort of conversation and creative space than published articles or even writing a book. And so from the very beginning, we had this idea that our interview transcripts were going to become the material for a verbatim play. For those of you who don't know what that means, a verbatim play is a style of theater creation where you take words from other sources and edit them into the dialogue that the actors speak in a play. So in our case, we conducted, what was it, 37 interviews with families? 37 interviews with families over the course of 4 years. We used those interviews in a number of different ways. So those interviews was our data, and that data became the basis for several articles that our team wrote. And we also built a website that people could use to see interview clips. But we also used it for creative intervention and to create this play. And the play was called Out at School. And it was a multimedia play. So there was verbatim text, they're layered with Benjamin's incredible images. For each of our scenes, Benjamin drew and built, because I know it's multimedia, Benjamin, what you do, so I know that there's layering as well. These incredible, what I want to call digital murals that get projected on the back of the screen and interpret the words in another way. And then it was performed by 12 actors. Some of whom were undergraduate students from New College, some of whom were graduate students from our team, like Bishop, and some of whom were professional actors from the community that we brought in to perform those words. And the character, so between those 12 people, we performed about 35 voices. And those voices had a range of identities and ages. And what verbatim text lets you do is it lets you put into conversation stories and perspectives that weren't in conversation at the beginning. So I can take an interview from 4 years ago and an interview from last week, and I can put them in the same scene and have those reflections speak to each other. And audiences are able to experience those words in an embodied way, to experience those words rather than just written on a page, experiencing them attached to a body, attached to a voice, attached to breath. And so they are humanized in a way that the page doesn't necessarily do. And the verbatim text is able to live and breathe in a space with you as you are living and breathing. Of course, one of our team members who's in here, who I would be remiss to not mention, is Kate Reed, Dr. Kate Reed, who is a Canadian folk artist, and she's exquisite. And so she was on our team as well, part of our research team, and she wrote 3 original songs based on the research and used quotations from the interviews and also from our group discussions about what sort of theory we were drawing on and what sort of conversations we were having. And she wrote these anthems, these 3 stunning anthems that go in the play as well.
Perfect. That's great. Benjamin, can we move over to you so you could talk a little bit about the visual art part of everything?
Sure. I'm so glad that Jenny went first because she's so good at like laying the groundwork of things and explaining like what the genres that we're working in. And so I guess to try and build on that, something that Jenny said that really kind of, I think, weaves well into what I've been doing with the images is how verbatim text, you were saying how it allows us to experience words like out of space and time from the time and the place that we're doing interviews with different people and bringing them together and letting the audience experience that in an embodied way. And I think that the layering in of images, for example, Kate's music as well. I won't speak to that specifically, but being able to do that with different art forms has let us just speak to more people more of the time. And so I think about differentiated learning, as we say in education, and how different people take in information in different ways. And I can definitely attest to that as a person who puts out information more accurately in visual terms a lot of the time. So I think we started in 2015 when we were preparing to do our first presentation. And the idea to do visual images started on a very practical level, I think, Tara. Like, we needed something portable. And we are not technical humans. So it was like, okay, how can we make a thing and then get it up so other people can see that thing real big? Like, is basically how we talked about it. Yeah. So my images initially, so not the ones in the book, but the ones that we projected, I think the way that Jenny described it was good, is like kind of these murals, essentially projected murals. They were a combination, like literally collaged of physical tactile art that I had made, that I made new for this project, that I was combining. And I do a similar thing now in some of the comic art that I'm doing for my thesis. And I've started to think of it as, like, if you could see the desk behind me, this would probably be more accurate, more easy to recognize. But I'm thinking now of like all these little bits of images as kind of like the letters in an alphabet that build a vocabulary. So you might see some ideas, some shapes, some images repeated in certain of these murals. And for me, what they are is like a combination of what people are saying in the text. So that part is more closely linked to verbatim, but then that is always combined with my experience of that person, whether I was there at the interview or whether I've just really interacted with it or know them outside of the interview. And also with my own experiences as a queer person in education, as a queer person in family. So when I make something to depict the monologue or the scene, it's impossible to unweave those things. So that's why we've in our writing and in the way that we talk about the play, as we've layered it with different kinds of art, we've talked about how that relates to verbatim, and we've had to really develop a language amongst ourselves around that, is like, what is verbatim and what do these other elements add to it? And then with I guess the last thing I'll say is with the most recent iteration of that, Tara's book that is just coming out now, I sort of recreated 8 images for scenes that we selected. And some of those are very close to the projection. Some of them have elements in them. And it's also been like 2, 3, 4 years for some of them since I did the original. And so necessarily they include like my different understandings and experiences of the world since then. So some of them are different. And it was also the first time I got to work fully in black and white, which is a whole different thing that I really enjoyed and I'm doing more of now as well.
That's wonderful. I'm going to
Tara, I have a couple of Benjamin's images from our Pride performance. Could I share my screen and show them to the group for a moment? I don't know, Benjamin, how you'd feel about that.
Is that okay?
Yeah, if you can make that happen, because I can't.
Yeah, I totally can. You just, whoever the host of the meeting is right now needs to give me permission to share my screen.
Okay, and I do that by going to security and share screen. Okay, go ahead, Jenny.
Awesome, thank you.
And while you're doing that, I'm going to show off the book. I just got it yesterday, and I'll show it to you when Jenny takes the share screen off. Go ahead, Jenny. Do you want to talk us through some of them?
So this is for scene 2. Scene 2 was called "We Still Have to Fight."
I see right here.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, it's not sharing the thing that I think it's sharing. Hang on.
It's sharing something, which is great. So.
Let's try again. Let's try that one. What do you see?
Wait.
Perfect. Scene 20. So these beautiful murals were projected. They were basically they were in many ways our set or our context. Yes. That our actors stood in front of and spoke. And so this scene was a scene about how when it's unsafe to come out, it's okay. You don't owe your coming out story to anyone. And so so we had two different people in our interviews who said that they wish they had waited until they were in a safer, a less precarious space in their life. And so this is Benjamin's beautiful image about this. And this is about, this reminds me, Benjamin, this is based on the story of the hummingbird trying to put out the forest fire, right?
Not from my perspective, but that's the beautiful thing, is you can bring to whatever you want. So one of the interesting things for me has been like using these in classes and having different people's interpretations of it. And that is fine with me. That's not where it came from for me.
Oh, okay. So that's one image.
The way it got interpreted. Can you put it back? I just want to show the layering for a minute.
I don't know why my screens do this. Sorry.
That's okay. Take your time. And I want people, when it comes back on, it's not on yet.
No, I know. Okay. Still no, hey?
No.
Wonder why.
That's okay. I want you, when Jenny gets it up, I want you to take a look at the top right-hand corner, because that collage and layering technique that Benjamin talked about is there. Do you want to try one more time?
Yeah, but I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to do it this way.
Okay.
Nope. I don't know why.
Okay, you keep trying.
That's so weird. Sorry.
But if we could, we'll interrupt wherever we are and just do a quick look at some of the technique. But what was so great about that moment, Jenny, so thank you for doing it, is that...
This is a very tiny version of part of it. That's all I have.
Is any of your layering there, Benjamin?
A little bit.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. What was so interesting about that past moment, though, is you understood the image of the hummingbird to link up to a hummingbird story, which seemed to resonate and help explain this monologue we had about the importance of waiting. You don't owe your coming out to anybody. And then it turns out that Benjamin didn't actually have that story, but you were able to add an analysis. It came on for a second.
I know. There.
Yeah, great. Here at the top right, you can see there's real texture. Of course, there's a whole layering of different colors, but Benjamin, it seems that it pops out. It feels textured. Can you talk a little bit about how you did that?
Well, sure. I mean, this one specifically, the actual like art technical stuff is I think initially it was like a very thick textured, like hand made paper basically. And then that was layered with acrylics and watercolors. So a lot of the images are created mostly from different pieces of things I make tactile, because it's important for me I feel like in order to communicate the feeling and communication and emotion that I want, I need to be working with my hands in order to make that happen. And then sometimes they're layered with different computer-based skills, which I have few of, but we make it happen. And so often the texture that you're seeing is like many different small pieces together. So, and that also just comes from like a purely practical standpoint. I did my undergrad in printmaking and lithography and like stone carving and sculpture and like all this stuff that I couldn't realistically do outside of that institution 20 years ago. And also I spent a lot of time immersing myself in various different chemicals, not realizing that I wouldn't be 20 years old forever. And so everything I do now is like small and non-toxic. And so it's very hands-on, and then I scan it and then I layer it together, literally.
Fantastic. And I'll just point out, and then we're going to move on to Bishop in a moment. Your eye is drawn to different parts. So because of the texturing, which is now I understand from the handmade paper, your eye is drawn to the top right. The colors do that as well. And that might layer your understanding of what does it mean to wait. The pink pops, of course, with with the title of the scene, and that might focus your attention on the theme of the monologue, which is wait. Of course, the bird is an arresting figure, and then, as Jenny said, immediately the story of the hummingbird layered what the data was saying about waiting. And for me too, the blue raindrops are important. The blue raindrops that are contrasting with what I see as a sun image, you know, talks about the contradictions of wanting to be out and out in the world, and yet feeling that sometimes waiting is better. So I think my eyes were drawn to these two contrasting images, but there are many ways that Benjamin's work will help layer the analysis of the scene. And when we performed it at Pride in 2019, we had 3 huge screens that Jenny's partner David helped us put together. And so as you were hearing folks read out loud the verbatim theater monologues, you would see these images and you would have this experience of yet another analysis that was happening visually. And I think that's the exciting thing about arts-based research. Thanks, Jenny. I'm glad you got it up. And we're going to move to Bishop, and we're going to move away from the arts-based part of the research to the testimonial part of the research. And what does it mean to get testimonies from folks who are not well served by the school system? And what does that mean for how we present our research? Bishop, the floor is yours, and then we'll have time for a few questions.
Yeah, so so my role on the research team is, I don't know, I hold many hats. And so I'm not an artist researcher, but I kind of have my hands in everything. So if you visit the website, you'll see that, which is kind of fun to be on the back ends of things. But something that came from our performance in June 2019 for Pride, of one of the final iterations of Out at School, the verbatim theater play, was this issue of ethics. And so, like Jenny said earlier, in order to do a research project, you have to complete institutional ethics. And there's a protocol like anonymity, like there's all this different stuff, like how are you going to mitigate harm and whatnot. And once you pass that, you kind of get to go on and do your research. And throughout the years of the project, there have been different discussions about ethics and whatnot, conversations that I was not privy to because I joined the team in 2018, and our funding ran out in 2020. So I was on the latter half of the research team and the time that we were together. And so around the time of performing Out at School, there was some talk of like, well, who can perform what role? Like, is it important for their identities to match up when it comes to like casting? And obviously, like, we all came from different places and different perspectives. We have different experiences and understandings of the world. And so there were tensions, and it was something that we were like, listen, we can either like throw this under the rug and pretend like it didn't happen and like la-di-da-di-da, life is normal. Or we can like actually take some ownership and some agency and really talk about it and write about it. And so after we performed Out at School in June, we came together, a few of us on a little, what's it called? Like a little working group. Yeah, focus group, thank you. And we talked about some of the things we wanted to address in our ethics. And again, this is like personal, like I call it the difference between institutional ethics, which is like capital E ethics, and lowercase ethics, which is like personal, like what can we live with? How do we interact with one another in like a relational, compassionate, empathetic way? And again, like these are people who have gifted us their testimonies, their stories. We're in community with them. We wanted to be able to honor them in ways that felt respectful and loving and caring. And so not every research team and not every project goes that far, but I think it was important for us to do that. And so we've spent time writing about it, brainstorming about it. It's that chapter has now been published in Tara's new book, which has come out. The book launches next week if you want to come. Just a little plug for that. And it was really great to get down and like sit down with some of these ethics that Benjamin gave us the term of like a living document, something that lives and breathes, something that will change over time, something that is adaptable, that we understand, that we're not sworn to, something that will inevitably change as we change and as the world changes. So just briefly to talk about one principle, one of the principles that we came up with was that we wanted to center stories of activism, advocacy, allyship, and resilience. And that was really because over the years of doing the project, there was a lot of deficit-based stories that came out of the interviews. A lot of students talking about self-harm or a lot of violence that has been perpetrated against them. And those stories were incredibly important, and we wanted to honor those, but at the same time, we wanted to make sure that that wasn't the only narrative that was heard. We wanted to make sure that stories of like joy and like thriving and of success and happiness were also sitting alongside those. So, and again, in academia, those stories of harm for LGBTQ students and families is very prominent. So part of our ethics was like, we want to speak back to that. But at the same time, like it was really nuanced, because even the term resiliency, since we've like come up with that ethic and we have published it, has changed, I think. And we wrote about that in the chapter where, resiliency is a hard term because often, racialized, queer, trans, broadly people of color are like asked to be resilient all the time instead of actually changing systemic institutions that require them to be resilient. And it's frustrating. It's this tug of war where we want to celebrate resiliency and be like, look at you, you did such a great job, but also at the same time critique an institution that requires them to have to be resilient in the first place, right? So a lot of our chapter and a lot of our work with ethics was thinking about these tensions and how we work together as a collective and honor where we're individually coming from, but also think about deeply the nuances that are involved in even talking about, things like resiliency or advocacy or who gets to be an ally and whatnot. So, yeah.
Fantastic. So you can see what kind of fun we've had over the last couple of years. We do have time for one or two questions to any of our guest speakers. While folks are thinking, Sue Tanya Parks, you had a response to this idea of asking questions about resilience. Would you feel comfortable just turning on your mic and telling us, you wrote agree. What are you thinking about at this moment?
I'm here.
Hi, Sue.
Hi.
Sorry, Sue Tanya. Yeah.
Yeah, that is correct. So when Bishop mentioned resilience, I'm also a person of color. And with that comes like this expectation from others that we have to be resilient or we have to be strong, right? And to me, that's what I was thinking about as Bishop was mentioning. Resilience was just that that expectation that people of color have to be strong and they have to be resilient. There's no in between, or there's no on the other side. This is what it is and this is what you must be.
Thank you so much. We have time for one more question or one more comment. Just turn on your microphone and say, hi, I have a question or I have a comment. We're good?
Hi.
Hi, Ramabai.
So I have a question for Jenny. Pardon my voice. Hope you can understand. And that is, can you briefly explain how you negotiated with the interviewees for, such free and unrestrained use of their work? And did you use fictional personae to carry the message? Or how were the characters? I know it's asking a lot, but just
no,
mainly,
I'm happy to talk about that.
Yeah, I want to know about the interviewees.
So there are forms of verbatim theater that uses a fictionalized character to voice the words, but we didn't do that. We kept so when at the time of the interview, we had our ethics forms, our ethics practice in this group was to sit with our interview subjects and tell them our plans. and to let them ask questions. And from the very beginning, we said one of our questions for them was, would you be comfortable with us using your words from the interview in a play? And what level of anonymity would you like? Do you want to be completely anonymous? Do you want to give us a pseudonym? Would you like us to use your name? And what was interesting to me is that I'm in my practice as a verbatim theater artist, my default is to use pseudonyms. Pseudonyms just let us, it protects you. As the play evolves and as time passes between when the interview was done and when the performance happens, that anonymity, it means that the person who gave those words all those years ago, or however much time has passed, isn't owned by them. But a number of our participants actually wanted us to use their names because they are advocates themselves, or they are working for LGBTQ rights in the education system or beyond, and want their name attached to their words. And so we had to have lots of conversations in our group because we also interviewed minors, we interviewed children. And 4 years is very different for someone who is 5 years old than someone who is 35 years old. And what are our obligations to the young people who shared their words with us? What are we comfortable with in regards to ethics and protecting the people who have shared their words with us and they're letting us create a play from their words? So this was a question that we returned to over and over again, and the question changed over time.
Okay.
So what we ended up doing was that in live performance, for the most part, and my teammates can correct me if I'm wrong, many of our people wanted us to use their names, and so we did. But anything that is published, for the most part, we use pseudonyms, or we at least drop last names.
I think just to give a little bit of specificity, if we are doing monologues that have children, that are by the children or reference children, we
always pseudonyms.
Pseudonyms in publishing, because you can't take it back. But in the interviews, where we can easily take people's interviews on and off the website, people sometimes use their pseudonyms, sometimes use their real names. But for the kids and for parents who talk about their kids, it's pseudonyms always in the writing.
Always. Yeah.
Or in the performing. Yeah.
Also, just one thing to add in addition to that is we also worked quite a bit on having a more definitive policy around what to do when adults talked about kids and we didn't necessarily have the child's permission. The idea that like the age of having human rights in Ontario, there's no bottom level for that. So like if you are a talking, functioning human at any age really, then you have human rights. So even if a parent is doing their very best for their child at that time, we want to have continued check-ins with that child then and later on as to whether they're okay being talked about, even if the parent's okay talking about it.
Perfect. And one more thing, Ramabai, and then we'll take one last question from Alexandra, and then we'll close up. We always send the latest script to the folks whose words we're using to vet. And if folks decide at that time they don't want their words in the form of the monologue or the dialogue that we've put them in, if they don't want it in, we take it out. So that means a continued commitment to our 37 families. We've actually become a community, right? And when we do perform it, lots of folks who were interviewed come, and it's always a powerful moment when, you know, the folks who we interviewed meet the folks who are playing or reading their words. But it's very, we always check in. It's an ongoing process. Thank you,
Tara. It's one of my favorite moments when when an actor gets to meet the person whose words they've been voicing. I can remember some really powerful backstage like hugs and friendships blossoming from those interactions.
For sure. And one of the things we've always done with our performances is there's always food afterwards. It's a chance to break bread. So it's not just a performance, it's a performance followed by a community gathering and to allow for those talks. Thank you, Jenny. One last question, and then we are going to close up. We're already a little late. How do you see the future of intertwining academia and theater performance? Do you think it will be a more common practice? So I have been intertwining both of them for about 20 years now. And I would say I find there are more and more people interested in arts-based research. I find that under this rubric of knowledge mobilization, where there's an expectation that your findings will not be limited to an academic crowd, but will have some resonance for people who don't have access to academic literature or academic talks, is an important thing. And I'm going to ask Bishop to talk a little bit about community engaged learning, because it's my understanding that this too is a shift, and community engaged learning and community engaged research is saying that it's important to involve the community, and arts-based methods are one way to make sure that research and community and art are often intertwined. Do you want to just say a few words about that?
Yeah, well, I think I agree. Like on an institutional academic level, they do expect like some type of dissemination that's public, I think, because that's how you can get it outside of the academy. But especially for the work that we do, like it comes from the community and in my opinion belongs in the community. Like we are being gifted something and we are returning it back to where it came from. And for me, my own research, that's incredibly important too. And I feel like art, either it's like visual, music, theater, whatever it is, like it helps us feel and honestly heal in ways that like reading an academic paper isn't going to help. And I think that's incredibly important, especially as communities who face, you know, oppression and face like marginalization and face institutional harm. Like it's important to have those stories be returned back to the community and have them, you know, reinforce like such strong, beautiful ways of being in the world. So I think art is like a huge way of doing that. And there's a few other researchers at OISE who do that. And I'm excited to see what happens in the future. I know in my research, I'm definitely thinking about arts-based research. And I know almost everyone on our team also does arts-based research. And I'm hoping that it becomes more prominent as the years go by. But Tara's, yeah, been doing it for forever.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Bishop. Just one quick thing. Benjamin talked about, please read in the chat what they do with visual images. If they ever represent one of the interviewees directly, we had a participant named Violet who transitioned in grade 1. Benjamin makes sure to get their explicit input on what that image would look like and permission for that. And Benjamin, we're going to have you close us up. You have a question from Anusha. Are you hoping to change anything in the education system itself, specifically for K to grade 6? And if so, what do you want to change?
I am laughing only because I want to change most things.
And I was like, is the answer everything?
Yeah. I guess thank you for the question. I think that what I can say at this point is that there are so many things that I want to change. And one of the things I have also learned and I'm continuing to learn as an educator and as a human trying to be a sustainable human in the world is that I think a quote that I heard recently, I think it was actually Michael J. Fox, totally out of context, but was that gratitude makes optimism sustainable. And what I mean by that is I've been looking for ways to make optimism sustainable. So one of the things that I want to change is for teachers to have the understanding and have the support that they have a lot of responsibilities, but they have a lot of power. And like, how do you weigh what you're being asked to do and what you actually can do, and also have the like emotional support to do those things sustainably? So in a very non-specific way, I saw that question before, and so I just pulled out this little card that's part of a poem that was part of my master's thesis. So it's like 3 lines I'm going to read, and I think it sums it up basically. It says, I want to talk about what it means to be in love with a profession that asks for your entire heart and practice, and then actively dissuade you from feeling too deeply, frequently, or specifically in public. So something that I'd really like to change about teacher education is instead of developing teachers who believe that they have to know everything in order to teach something, I would love to help create a system where teachers understand that they have just as much or often much more to learn from their students and families, and that it's okay to be a teacher and to be confident in your role as a teacher and to not know what you're talking about. You're there to like support and facilitate and keep learning.
Benjamin, can you read that? Can you read that quotation again? It was so powerful.
Sure. Do we have time to?
Sure. And then we'll close up after that and say thank you.
I want to talk about what it means to be in love with a profession that asks for your entire heart and practice, and then actively dissuades you from feeling too deeply, frequently, or specifically in public. The last part of it is, the coming out story that we have been taught to expect in education is not inherently queer. In or out is someone else's binary, built on a construct of difference that ignores queer lives, experiences, hearts.
Thank you, Benjamin. Thank you, everybody. I'm just going to quickly show, the book came in the mail yesterday. This is our new book. Each of the folks here who you heard speak have chapters in it, and we will have a book launch next week. And we put the link for the book launch on chat. And I'd love to see you there. Everybody else would love to see you there. But in the meantime, thank you so much for coming to New Research at Noon. I hope you enjoyed yourself, and we loved having you all here. And Jenny, thanks for bringing your class here. I hope they enjoyed it. We certainly enjoyed having them.
I'm so glad. It's funny to call you D60, but it's really wonderful that you were here. Thank you so much for being here. And Tara, thank you for the invitation.
So you're very welcome. So have a wonderful weekend, everybody. The next New Research at Noon will be the first Friday in March, and our theme is Research with Youth. And if you liked being part of our discussion today, feel free to come back. We'll make sure that you get the Zoom link when we get closer to the date. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much for today, and we'll see you all soon. Bye.